Alright, so another great long Vue tutorial. At least I hope they're great. Anyways, in this one we are going to be talking about cloud zones. Not cloud layers, but cloud zones. And you can actually work with the zones to make different cloud layers, but you can actually position the clouds where you want. And I believe that this option is only available in Vue 9 and above. So if you have Vue 8, Vue 7, or 6, or 5, or whatever, I'm afraid this might not work for you. Though I'm sure there are other ways that you can go about, setting up the cloud zones. But right now, I am in Vue 9.5 Extreme, and I'm going to be showing you how to do it within Vue 9 and above. So go ahead and open up Vue if you want to follow along, or you can watch or whatever. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to load my favorite atmosphere that I created, which is called Realism Default. This will be available at any time on my Vue-tuts DeviantArt page. So if you want to go there and join the group, or just go and download the packs I already have there, or the tutorials or whatever, there's more there. You can go there and do whatever. I know a quick little plug-in for it. I'm sorry, but I gotta do it. So with that loaded, you can use any atmosphere you want within Vue 9. Usually the default one will be the best to work with as just like a little standard setup. What you want to do though, within Vue 9 or even in Vue 8, you want to make sure you're using the spectral model, just because the spectral model will give you the most lifelike look, I guess, like when it comes to lighting and atmospherics. These atmosphere models are good for their certain reasons, but I use the spectral model because I like the way it makes the renders look more realistic and lifelike. So what I have here is I have set it to global radiosity. I'm not using global illumination or global ambient occlusion or global ambience, though there's nothing wrong with using these lighting models. I use global radiosity mainly because I like getting that extra detail in the shadows and on the materials and the models as well. So that's why I use global radiosity. Global illumination is just as good for other purposes, and I like to use global ambience every once in a while. Well, for now I'm going to stick with global radiosity. And that might be a good startup for you. If you want to make a realistic looking atmosphere, here's some options that you can follow here that can kind of give you some ideas of what you can use as a realistic looking atmosphere. You can use a little bit of fog. There's nothing wrong with using a little bit of fog, though I don't tend to use much of it. I only really use it when I'm doing like a final render and I need something in the distance to be a little bit more foggy and hazed out. So you can set those to 0 if you want. I don't use them very often. Anyways, back to the subject of the tutorial, which is cloud zones. I'm going to go ahead and put in an object here, just a quick object. You know what? I'm going to load an object that I made. This could actually be a little bit better. Let me go to import and Vue-tuts material scene pack 1. I'm going to use where do I have it? It's not in there. It's right here. Giant's Boulder. That's where it's at. And this is a meta blob that I put together, and then I baked it into polygons and use it as a different just a different model to use within Vue. I really like it. It has a lot of good detail. Let me go ahead and zoom in on it here real quick and then change the lighting to be more around the front of it, right there. Maybe that's too much. Right there. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and render a quick preview of it. I'm going to get more from the side though. That's where all the good details at. It's from the side. You can actually rotate it. If you downloaded this on our website, you can use it for this tutorial or help you move along with me. And then Why the hell not? Let's just put it in there. It's a little rock formation that I created using Metablob, and I have a tutorial on how to make it, or something similar anyways. I made this without running a tutorial, but I'll get into how to make something like this in the future. So right now, yeah, we have a pretty decent atmosphere set up. We got some good lighting and everything, so let me go ahead and zoom out, and we'll start. I just had to get something set up. It's a very good basics. Make sure you set up the scene. I usually tend to make the atmosphere last, but set up the scene how you want it, then create your atmosphere is what I would recommend. You can do it both ways. You can create your atmosphere and then create your scene, but I like to go with creating the scene, then the atmosphere. Alright, atmosphere editor, we're going to go to clouds. And for cloud zones, instead of, when you load up a cloud, let's just use this one for example, and then let's just change a few settings here to help us demonstrate what we mean by cloud zones. So with clouds, we'll just do this as default. The default settings minus what we changed in the density. We're going to render this out. And it's okay to have clouds that stretch way beyond the horizon right here and be visible in your renders and everything. But if you don't want clouds to go all the way back there or to completely engulf your scene, one of the best ways to fix that, at least in Vue 9 and above, is to use a cloud zone. They might be available in Vue 8, like I said, I'm not entirely sure, I can't really remember. But within Vue 9, using cloud zones would definitely help increase the realism of your scene. What you want to do is, excuse my squeaky chair, is maybe we just want one cloud to be over here, another one to be down here, and maybe we want some stratus clouds to be on the top, but we don't want them to stretch all the way back to the horizon. So what we do is we go to the cumulus layer here for the clouds, we click limit cloud to zone. And what that does is it takes the cloud, so engulfs it in this zone right here. We have the initial boundary, and then we have the fall-off boundary, which is the secondary circle here. And then that just limits the cloud to one area, and then you can move it around and whatnot. I believe when you have it set just inside the cloud zone like this, you can maneuver it how you please. You have to grab it right here or else it won't move. And then now you only have clouds in certain areas. And in some cases this is really good. I mean, you can, now that when we do a render here, you can see that clouds aren't stretching clear back off into the horizon because I don't want the clouds there, I just want them right here in front. There's no clouds back there, we don't want those back there. And depending on the cloud material you choose, you might get something that looks pretty good by default, like this. This looks actually pretty decent for default, but sometimes they'll be more circular. They'll take on the boundary formation. And to fix that, you want to play with the fall-off right here. And I have it at 10%. If I set this to 0, they kind of stretch out towards the boundary a little bit more, kind of crushed in. But if I set this to 100, there's less clouds, but they don't take on the foundation, the boundary, the foundation of the boundary. A good way to fix that is if you go into the cloud options, you can just change like the density. You can change those a little bit. Let's change that to like 200, so they're still a little bit dark, but not too much. Change the opacity, so they're a little bit less opaque. We can change the cover to about 81. You can see how they start to stretch. But if you send this all the way up to 100, you can see that boundary that I'm starting to get from the cloud zone. I set this to 200. You can really see the boundary. If I set this to maybe, let's say 500 or 5,000, there isn't much to show here because you're hitting that boundary 100%. If I change this down to 25, or even let's go to 10, and then render this out. You can see how they're circular. Doesn't look realistic. It just looks like a big circular cloud. And you can do this and get some good results depending on what you want to make. If you want some tornado or even a nuclear bomb that has that little sphere around the shaft of the mushroom cloud, this is a good way to do it. You can make some really good effects with it like that. But other than that, there's not too many realistic applications to have a small fall off area on your cloud zones. So go ahead and cancel that. I'm going to raise this back up to 100, and you can play with it, get different results. And then I'm going to go ahead and just lower this down. I guess if you change the density past 100, it's not going to, or the cover past 100, it's not going to do anything really. So I'm going to change that still. Let's change the detail mount, get a little bit more in there. Let's do 61, and then feather it a little bit, and then we will change the ambient lighting. Let's make it darker actually. There we go. And then let's change the shadow density, and then sharpness we'll take down to 40, and then we'll change the opacity to be a little bit higher again. Alright, and you can get some really good results with this. So say we have this rock, then we have our sunshine and our clouds, and we want to get some really good, maybe Godray effects or something similar. Bring this way out here, the sun, bring it kind of up above the clouds here, like in front and behind of this cloud right here. And then let's go back to the atmosphere and let's boost up the haze a little bit. Let's lower that so it's not so high up there. There we go. And then let's go ahead and check Godrays, and let's change the glow intensity to about 100. Maybe it'll have to be a little bit higher up above. I used to be able to do this really quick and easy, but now it's getting kind of hard for me to maneuver it. Alright, well, forget the Godrays. We'll try that in a minute. So, say we just have this as our render. We have the glow intensity pretty high. Let's change the scattering anisotropy. Right there, change that 100, change it to 0. Let's put it on 41, keep it there. Aerial perspective, and then decay mount, and then let's slightly raise the sky ground density. Alright, and then we're just going to lower the fog because we don't want the fog or need it. And then let's just go ahead and render a preview of this. So now we just have realistic looking clouds, maybe at a sunset, could be a sunrise, but now you don't have clouds everywhere in your sky. So that's a good, decent application for cloud zones. And as before, if you get the right settings, you can get some good looking Godrays as well. It really comes down to how well you are with working with them. I really suck at Godrays. I get them on accident most of the time. But as soon as I figure out a good technique to show you guys, I'll definitely show you how I did it. And then using cloud zones, you can get much better looking volumetric clouds than if you were just to load up a pre-made cloud by right-clicking on here and then choosing what you want. So if you want to compare these, let's go ahead and cancel that render. I'm going to fix these clouds real fast. They're a little bit too not enough opaque. A little more opacity on them. Just because it's nice and bright, that sun's gonna shine through on those less dense areas. Alright, so then if we load up, and you can change the settings in these clouds too. You don't have to stick with what they look like right now. But if you look at them right here, we get this and put it off to the back, and then we want to get into the material here. Make sure this is set to version 2 for the cloud object, and then cloud settings, you want to change the ambient lighting down to there. We don't want it to be as bright. Change it to 0. We're going to change the opacity to about 35. Kind of keep the settings the same as what we had with our cloud zone. Shadow density, I believe, 55. Let's change the uniformity slightly to 90. Not that it's really going to change a lot. Then we're going to change the feathers to about 35. That'll change it slightly. Scaling to about 25. That will change it. And let's go ahead and render that out. So now you're getting some Godrays right here. We can see the haze hitting the cloud, showing off some haze and grain because we don't have the settings for the atmosphere at a very high level, so they're kind of poor. But you can see the results. As though this does look good. You can get some more, and this is blocking the light from hitting these clouds, so there's not much light getting through to these. That's why they're a lot darker, and the shadow density on this is really high, like 55%. Plus it's higher. But these, as opposed to these, look much more realistic when the light's hitting it just right. Not that this cloud looks bad at all. You can change this to look more realistic if you really want to work at it. But you're going to get much better results using these clouds, like the actual atmospheric clouds that aren't just made with, you know, a few primitives with a material set to them. You can actually get some good results mixing the two, as you can see. So let's look at another application for this. And this is one that not very many people look at like as like an actual option. I'm going to go ahead and change these down to lower levels again. And then the sun will rise to there. Alright. We're going to change the glow amount back down to 40. I like to have a high glow amount, but that was just a little bit too... There wasn't enough for that scene right there. Alright, so say you have a body of water. So we have our sea, and then ground. We're going to drop this slightly to there. And then let's hover above the water and look down at it. And let's get rid of the meta blob. We didn't even really use that. Let's just get rid of it. We want there to be sunlight in our water. But let's go ahead and change the settings here. So we're going to change the alpha boost. This is what changed the foam and the water. So we don't want too much. We only want a little bit, and you can actually go way low on this and still get plenty of foam. But the real thing comes to the highlights. So we're going to change the highlight of the water to be slightly more bright, maybe not 100% or even 90%. Let's change it to 75%, and then we're going to change it to shiny. You can see the sun, and then let's change it to 85. That looks good. I'm going to change the anisotropic highlighting to 55. Maybe not 55, maybe 30. 9. We want that sun in there still, but I don't think we're going to get much of it in there even if we change this a little bit. So for now, we'll just keep it at 0. Maybe we do want it to be higher. 15. We're going to go with 15. We're going to keep it as that. We go to transparency. We're going to change the fade out so the water is just a little bit more dark. And then we're going to turn reflective with angle. Slightly more. And then we're going to go ahead and load up an atmosphere. Or if you already have the same one open, go ahead and just load up a cloud layer. So now you have the water. We don't want the camera up in the clouds or else it's not going to look good. We want them to be down. Let's change the altitude of the clouds to be a little higher. There we go. And then we gotta change that to fit the scale of the altitude. There we go. So now we just look for some good reflections of the clouds. As you can see clear back there, there's some reflections. Maybe we gotta raise this to be higher. Then change the cover 81. Let's go to 100. Let's get a better cloud layer, one that has a lot. There we go, and it's already high up there. So we can change the camera to be higher so we can see more of those reflections. Okay, so say you have an island down here. So here's our island. Or here's our island. There we go. And you go, wow, that's cool. We got an island. We got water surrounding it. I'm going to assign a material to here so it looks darker. I really like Mineral Infinity. That's like the only thing I really use anymore nowadays. Once it loads, my computer's being a little slow right now. So we're going to just put that on there just to give it a little bit darker tone. So now there's our island, and we have water surrounding it. Looks nice, looks decent, looks cool, but we have our atmosphere produced too much cloud coverage, and the reflections on the water are kind of overtaking the water. We want more water, less clouds, but we want to keep the clouds as a reflection effect. Well, instead of going to your sea, and just to make this a little bit more realistic for the sake of the tutorial, we're going to change this to about 63, and we're going to change that just for the sake of doing it. Alright, so instead of going into your sea and and turning up blurred transparencies and going to reflections and turning up, turn this on to about 5 or 10 and reflect the world, and then turning up blurred reflections to get those clouds to be blurry and less intrusive, you could instead turn that off, transparencies, don't blur the transparencies, go to your cloud layer and limit the cloud to a zone. And that, in turn, once you can move this, assuming you get the right settings and the right scale, right there, you can see them right there a little bit, and right there, and then changing, if you click on this, it'll change the boundary. You can increase the boundary so it's bigger. That way you can fill as much sky as you need, and you're not filling the entire world. If you zoom out here, so white boundary is technically the boundary of your world. If you zoom out here, so it's as big as your boundary of your world, your clouds are going to encompass the entire sky like it was before. That in turn can give you these nasty reflections that you don't want again. So if you keep it smaller than the boundary of your world and just the boundary of your terrain, you will get those reflections right here and right here, and you can see them. You can move it out here so you get it more out into the open water, like right here. You can position it, and then you can play with the fall off so it looks more realistic as a reflection. And there's just a lot of good uses for it. And then if you turn up the fallout and you turn out that you've limited your cloud just a little bit too much, you can always turn down the fallout and bring in the detail you want again. Or again, you can just go into the atmosphere editor and then change the density or the cover. You can change the cover, which will probably be better. There you go, there's your cover. It's now covering the island. Turn up the detail amount, get the detail you want. There's just a million different reasons why a cloud layer would be much better to use than just using the entire, well, not cloud layer, but cloud zone, using the entire atmosphere as a zone. So after that, this is going to be probably a horrible render, but we're going to do it preview quality. We're going to look at this island, quote unquote, and you can see the reflections of the clouds, and you play with the water settings a little bit more, you can get some good reflections. And this is just really quick, basic, quick understanding of how to use them. So obviously it's not going to look the best. You can turn down anisotropic highlighting, or yeah, and then fix the issue like that. You can make it less shiny, you can make it more dull. You can change the reflective with angle value. You can just do a whole bunch of different options that change the way your cloud reflects off the water. So there's another practical use to use a cloud zone. Now let's go ahead and try, let's get rid of that, let's get rid of that, and let's get rid of that. So all we have is the ground. So let's go back down to the ground, look up. So now all we have is we gotta raise the ground to the default level. Maybe a little higher. No, too high. We want it to be back to the default. That's a little bit too low. There we go. Default. So let's go ahead and load up another primitive junk here. We know we love primitives. They're always good for examples. Never, ever deny a primitive, because they are going to be the best thing to use when it comes to scale and just a whole bunch of different options. So always use circles or spheres and different boxes and stuff like that. They will come in handy. So I'm going to change the sunlight here so we get a shadow. That's just an OCD thing. I like the shadow to be on that side for some reason. Helps me position it more artistically. Alright. So I'm going to load up a dark material here just so it's easier to see. We're going to choose a different one. This one. We're going to choose this one. Dark material. Alright. So say we have another, we're going to add a couple layers here. And you can use any cloud layer. You can use the Stratus default clouds that come with Vue. So we'll throw in some of those. We'll add just the spectral tool. We'll throw in that. And we'll add one more right there. So all we have is this. A big grouping of clouds, lots of layers. You just want to have some clouds in some areas and other clouds in other areas. So the best way to do that is, of course, to use a zone. So right here, you know, we got the stratus, which, you know, we got to layer it so it looks realistic. We got this stratus, looks like it's going below the cumulus clouds. So let's go ahead and close that. Close that. We'll go to alto stratus. We'll actually raise that to be much higher, about right there. The thick, high ones, those are okay, and the cloud front will lower. So we now have a more realistic looking scene with not a bad mixture of clouds. We have the high stratus clouds, which you can barely see right there, but say we want the cloud front is okay the way it is. We want that to stretch all the way across the horizon, but we don't want these thick high cumulus clouds to be where they are. So we'll take that down. I'm going to raise the cloud zone limit, and I'm going to position these over here and a little bit lower. And then for the alto stratus, we're going to go ahead and stretch those out so they're a little bit longer, and so now we have this. So you can't really see the thick high cumulus. We have the cloud front and then the stratus clouds, which are stretching across. So that looks fine. I mean, if you want to go with that, then that looks fine. Of course, to me it doesn't look really realistic, but let's go ahead and try to find where those thick high cumulus fit in. You can put these, obviously you gotta have, make sure it's in your scene. You can change this so where did I put it? Right there. So that this is much bigger. And now let's render. So now you can see the thick high cumulus right here. It's higher than the cloud front, but it's not encompassing the entire sky. It's not mixing in with the cloud front, casting extra shadows and stuff like that. That's also a good practical way to use it with cloud layers. Of course, you put more time and effort into it, actually make it look the best way you can possible, it'll look much better. But now they're not completely encompassing the sky. You can still see the stratus, you can see the cloud front. Then you don't have to change the density or the cover, sorry. You don't have to change the cover of the clouds and get something you don't want. All you have to do is just take the entire cloud, limit it to a zone, and then position it in your scene where you want it. It'll give you much better results. So say we want this to be a little thicker as well. We're going to have to change this back to here. Change it so it's a little bit more thick. And we can bring it all the way down to the ground. And now they're still in our scene. Everything still looks good. Maybe not all the way down to the ground, maybe a little bit higher than the ground, like right there. And they're still in our scene. So there's cloud zoning. So, and just for the sake of a tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and go over how to make a good default, fast to render default atmosphere. That still gives you pretty good details. So I'm going to go ahead and load up a few primitives here. Just a couple circles. I'm telling you, primitives are the best thing that's going to happen to you inside Vue. Don't underestimate the primitives. Position these around. And this is what I do when I create an atmosphere. Get a bunch of little primitives in there, and you can throw in some other looking primitives, like this diamond here, just for the sake of being fun. And you want to position the sunlight around as to make it easy to see the primitive as well as shadows, like right there. So what you're looking for in an atmosphere, especially a high quality default realistic atmosphere, is good shadows, good skylight, and good definition. So I'm going to go ahead and load up a material, and there's going to be a different material for each one of these primitives. I'm just going to change it to be one that's fast and easy to render, like this rock Y. You can choose any one you want. It can be any material. Don't let me stop you by using ones that are paid for. Here, we'll load up, we'll go to rocks, and we'll load up the gray-brown rock. And then for the pyramid, we'll load up something fun. Dragon skin. I've never even known. Dragon skin's too rough looking. Metals. We'll go to metals. There we go. No, that's too dark. Right there. Polished silver. Sweet. We render those out. You can see the materials on the rocks. I even have a good little reflection right there on that polished silver. So that's good. That'll actually help us. If you have something reflective, that'll actually help you in rendering your atmosphere. So you want to start with the sunlight high. Of course, everybody wants a good looking sunset, but if you want to make a default atmosphere that has good quality, it's really easy to render and it's fast, you want the sun to be bright, like a summer day. And then when we go to atmosphere editor, you can use the same settings if you want, though I would recommend finding your own set of default settings for your default scene or your default atmosphere. I would recommend not having any clouds either. Don't put any clouds in it. And for sky, fog, and haze, the sky, you know, people always set it to 100, but when you have a really bright sun, it's really high up there, it's going to be too bright. It's going to look unrealistic. So I always lower it down to about 80 is where I put it. About 80%. And that gives us enough boundary between the decay and the sky density. You can even go lower if you want, though going much lower I wouldn't recommend doing. You don't want too much of a difference. Like this one right here, 70% still looks okay, but that's just the settings that I have with the decay and the haze amount. The haze amount you can see right here, it goes flatline with the horizon. So this is actually looking pretty good. I actually like it at 70%, so I'll keep it. And then the altitude. If you have, depending on the size of your terrain, if you have like a 12-kilometer size terrain, obviously you want an atmosphere that is 12 kilometers or higher. But I set mine to 6. I don't usually make my terrains higher than 5. 8 I'll go up to sometimes. If that's the case, I'll just change this to like 10 kilometers or 11 kilometers or even 12 kilometers, depending. It just depends on how the scene looks. And then the decay amount, this is actually higher than I want it to be because we changed it before. I usually set this to be about 55 and with the altitude of 3. The colors are dependent upon what you want in your scene. I would always go with a good looking realistic sky color. If I edit this color, you can see the values here, 85, 126, and 183. And then you can also lighten that up if you need it to be a little bit lighter, like right here. Though if you make it too light, it's going to look washed out. It's going to look like, you know, your horizon has too much fog or haze, and it's not going to look realistic. So a little bit darker for the sky color. You can have it obviously don't make it too dark, like right here, and then it just doesn't look realistic. It doesn't look bad. It looks like you have a high aerial perspective, but we just want it to be a little bit dark but not too dark, so maybe even a little bit darker than that. Just change it slightly to, I'll just make it darker. There we go. I can't remember the settings I had on it, but I guess we'll do. Maybe that looked better. Huh. It looks okay. It looks about the same as I had it before, so that's okay. And then for the haze density, I tend not to have a lot of haze. This is just my opinion, but I will have a low haze and a low altitude of about 100 or so. You only want haze in there maybe when you have a sunset or sunrise, and then you might want quite a bit to help color the sky a little bit more, help set the distance of the way the scene looks. But for default settings, default atmospheres, you're not going to have much in the way of haze. So I wouldn't worry too much about having a lot in there. And even for fog, you have little to no fog, in my opinion. Fog's okay, though. If you say you turn this up and you have like a grayish color for fog, your scene, you know, it could look cool, like right here. Looks good for like maybe a dust storm is blowing in or something, and you're in a desert scene. Doing that with fog would look pretty much okay, though you don't want it to be too high or even non-existent. So I go ahead and change those. I'm going to raise this to be a little bit, or not raise it, but lower it to be slightly lower. There we go. And then I'm going to raise this to about 10. Alright. And then I'm going to even lower this, 65. No, I'm going to raise it, 80. I liked it at 75, but I also like the nice blue right there. And then with the glow intensity, have anywhere between 100 and 20. I would always have a little bit of glow intensity. I rarely ever go with 0. I tend to stick around 40 for the default scene, just because it's a good amount of glow. You're not getting too much, you're not getting too little. Set that to 1. And then you should be good. That's all preference. These last 3 here are preference. Obviously, if you don't have any clouds, you don't have to worry about cloud anisotropy. Scattering anisotropy is important, especially depending on the options you choose up here. I like mine to be about 80, 81. Because it's a good, again, it's not, your sunlight's not taking up your entire scene, and it's just limiting it to this. Your sun is only right there. If you change this down, depending on your glow amount as well, if you change this to be higher, and the settings you have right here, your sun can take up almost your entire scene. So I set mine to be about 81 is usually where I default it to, and then that way it's not obtrusive. But again, these are all personal preference on what you want. For the haze color, I usually go with like a really dark brown. You can see the values here. I go with a dark brown for the haze just because it gives out good natural looks when it comes to the scene. You don't want anything light with haze. You can get away with it, of course, but you don't want anything light with the haze. It can completely ruin your scene. You want to make sure that your haze is kind of dark on the dark side. Join them on the dark side. So, and that's the typical default atmosphere. And just to kind of get out all quality boost, I would set to none, and the aerial perspective I'll set to 1, and then also change out the volumetric sunlight. You can check Godrays if you want. Oh, you can always have this set the no shadows on clouds or projected shadows on clouds or whatever. I always set mine to volumetric, and I always check Godrays. For the sun, I have usually the default what it comes with, like a 2% on the sun, and then a semi-decent sized corona. You should be good. With the light, I always set the light balance more towards sunlight, and I set the uniformity or the ambient light to 100. And typically for the overall skylight color, this is the next portion we're going to get into, you usually want this to be the same color as this, and maybe even slightly lighter. So if you just copy this color and then paste it, and then go in here and then slightly lower the tone of it, and then raise the sky dome lighting gain to about 3 or 4, you will get a nice looking realistic atmosphere. Nice summer atmosphere too. You can change the shadow smoothing. I like to keep mine around 50. If you look underneath here, if you raise this so the shadow is darker underneath the sphere, it'll smooth the dark area first and then smooth out. We gotta do a full quality render to actually see it. So let me change that to final, and we'll just render it out pretty quick here. And this is a pretty decent fast atmosphere to render out, and it gives you good detail, and that's what we're looking for, is good detail on a fast render. We could probably change the color of this so it doesn't blend in so much with the ground. You can set a material to the ground if you want. I would recommend not using the ground as a default for other things. I would always set like maybe a standard terrain underneath your objects and setting material to that rather to the ground. So right here where it gets dark and then fades into the skylight color, sky dome lighting gain, it smooths out that portion. So it's dark and then it smooths out. But if we change this down to like 10, then render it out, you can already see kind of what's going on there. It usually just takes a minute. You can see it doesn't fade it, doesn't smooth it as much. So what I would recommend is, having a good decent amount, not 50, maybe not 50, but maybe 35, 45 in that area. That would be good. And also for the ambient light color, this is usually good at the default, at the light blue color here. So if you look at the settings here, it has 213, 233, 255. Then you can get the hue, the luminosity, and the saturation. Basically, it's the same color as this, just very light. That's all it is. Keeping that at this color is usually good. You don't usually have to change much there. You can maybe make it a little bit darker, though I wouldn't put too much stock into it. It's usually good the way it's at now. Even right there, it might be too much if you look up. It's kind of changing our sky. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that sphere back to the ground, and I'm going to go in and change the color to be darker. There we go. Alright, zoom out here, get all of them. And then position the camera. There we go. And then also what you want to see, especially on cameras, when you use like a fisheye lens or something like that, you always get the topmost part of the atmosphere is always darker, and that's a natural occurring thing in atmospheres. You want it to fade down to be lighter on the horizon and darker the higher you look up. And same thing in Vue. You want that exact same thing. If you're getting that effect, most likely you're doing the right thing. You just got to kind of fiddle around with it the way you want to make it look, and then you should be good. Another thing is if you're doing an outdoor render and you're using global radiosity, I always check optimized for outdoor rendering. And then I just keep these as default. You don't have to use indirect atmospherics. And that's a new feature that is available in Vue 9 and 9.5 and 10. And what that is if you have if you're in a desert area and you have red sand and your cloud's really close to the ground and you want that sand to emit light and hit the clouds and change the coloring of the clouds, that's what indirect atmospheric is. Let me go ahead and show you that real fast. And I know this was just going to be a quick tutorial on cloud zones, but it doesn't hurt to learn something new. So we're going to make about two little trains here. Actually, they're not going to be little, they're going to be kind of big. Set them down to the ground. And then we're just going to go ahead and position ourselves in front of them. Down, 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 down. Alright, and then we're just gonna load up a nice red material, something that has a lot of reflection. So maybe that, and just copy that material there. And then let's go ahead and load up a cloud layer. And then let's lower it right there. And this is better shown with the effect turned on. There we go. Then of course, you have to have a high gain to see it. Even more than that maybe. Maybe the clouds have to be closer. And depending on the settings of the clouds, you might not get the right effect. It's just best to play around with it, in my opinion. Everything in Vue you just need to play around with. Also, maybe indirect skylighting. Maybe it's too dull. I don't know. But what it does, if you can get it to work, I haven't really played around with it too much, so I'm very new to it as well. But what it does is it'll reflect the color of the light of the color to the clouds. So like if you ever went out to Las Vegas, the road out there is just nothing but sand, dirt, different colors of rocks. I drove down there, and it was raining, it was cloudy, it stopped raining, and I saw the clouds, and they're reflecting this yellowish, reddish, orangish tint. And I was like, okay, well, what is that? How does that happen? Well, it's just, if in Vue terms, global radiosity. It's hitting the ground, it's bouncing up to the sky, and it's hitting the clouds, and it's coloring the clouds. That's what indirect atmospherics is. It's just indirect. It's light bouncing, reflecting, and hitting different objects. So that's what that is. Different settings, maybe the cloud settings, different settings in the light settings can change it, and then eventually it'll work. I've seen it happen. I've seen it in other videos. I just haven't been able to get it to work because I don't ever really use it. But in any case, that's the tutorial. I'm done. I'll leave you alone. You can go ahead and comment, rate, subscribe. I would really like it if you comment. I'd really like it if you subscribe. It really makes doing this a lot easier for me because it makes me feel like I'm actually getting something done. So anyways, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask, and I will see you later.